Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to take another look at our CentOS Linux installation on our virtual machines. This video assumes a couple of things. Number one, that you've gotten started working with your Oracle VM VirtualBox Manager, have installed a couple of CentOS virtual machines, and in this video, we are going to focus on how to keep them updated, as well as using the Yum package manager. And so to begin with, you'll notice here that I have the UI, the dashboard, whatever you'd like to call it. And I have my two virtual machines. I actually have both of them running. You would simply just click on whichever one was not running and then go ahead and start it. Or in this case, we can just simply show it. So I have both my client and my server running. Now, unless you've got enough resources on your laptop or desktop, you probably don't want to do this particular exercise with both or all of your VMs running. We're going to just focus on the client. And then what I would encourage you to do is to do one at a time and then pause this video and then try to go back to the other machine and verify that you can do the same steps without my help. And so to begin with, we are going to focus, as I said, on one of the machines. We're just going to arbitrarily pick our client. And to understand a little bit about what we're going to do in this video, the first thing that you want to do is click on the client and click here in the VM and attempt to log on. And before we even log on, you'll notice that my mouse is stuck. And so the idea here, among other things, is to keep our machine updated, but also want to install the VirtualBox guest editions. So be prepared for this video to take a little bit of time, depending on your internet connection. And let's go ahead and get started. So go ahead and log in. Now, in a previous video, I had set up this G Myers account so that it could sudo or basically run as a root account so that we can do things like software installs. If you've not yet done that, you'll need to either that or log in as root, which again, I do not think is a good idea. But once you've logged in, and preferably as an account that can sudo, probably one of the things that you'd want to do is just change your display settings, and hopefully for one of the last times. And we're going to go ahead and pick the 1680 by 1050. That's what works for me on this monitor and also for the video that I am recording. And at this point, then everything else we are going to do from the terminal. So go ahead and launch a terminal. And the first thing to do periodically, maybe not every time you log onto the virtual machine, but definitely every few weeks, is to go ahead and run Yum and update all of the existing packages. So I'm going to go ahead and run sudo yum. I'm going to go ahead and pass the -y to it, which basically accepts or says yes to all the prompts, and update. Now, before we go any further, let's take a second to talk about Yum. I'm going to go ahead and run this so that you'll see here the prompt. And then if there are any packages to update, then it will take a little bit of time. And so while you're waiting on that to finish, let's talk a little bit about what is Yum. Yum is basically a package manager. It stands for the Yellow Dog Updater Modified. It is a free and open source command line package management utility for Linux operating system. It's not exclusive to CentOS. Basically, you want to think of it like this. It's sort of a cross between a repository manager and your Windows or your Mac updater. And what it does is it keeps track of the locally installed packages on your machine. And whenever you update it, it looks at the local version to see what versions those are. It looks to the online repository that is set up that may have updates. It compares the versions, and if there's a newer version available, along with any of the dependencies, it downloads them and installs them. And so again, it's a pretty good tool. There are ultimately other tools that we can use and we will be using, but for this particular series, we're going to focus in on the Yum package manager. Now, I'm going to be running a number of commands in the terminal. I will leave some of them in the comment section for this video. Remember that the goal is to ultimately install VirtualBox guest editions. And so what we're going to need to do is to download and install some of the dependencies that are required for the VirtualBox guest editions. Now, you may, and we may actually run into an error as we go along, and I will update this list of dependencies as the versions change. So don't be surprised if you have some problems. You may have connectivity issues and so on. So again, we'll see how many problems we have in this particular video, and I'll talk about them. But ultimately, this is just kind of the process with working with Linux. So let's go ahead and get started. The first one that we want to do is, again, we're going to run our sudo yum. And in this case, what we want to do is we again pass our -y switch, but we are going to install a new package called epel-release. Now I'm going to go ahead and kick this off real quick. You'll notice that it does not prompt me again for my password because I've recently run sudo. But let's talk a little bit about what epel-release is. And again, I'm going to provide some of these links in the comments section. The idea here is that epel-release includes additional packages and libraries that don't come with a basic CentOS install. It allows for you, along with other packages, to do things like kernel development, development in general in some cases. And for instance, you'll see that we're also going to download support for another language called Perl, or scripting language. And you'll get the idea here that generally what we're doing is we're just adding features to our CentOS install. Now that one went relatively quick. What we want to do as we go along is just periodically run our yum-y update. And you can see here that there are, in fact, updates for that particular package. So again, this may take a few seconds to run. Again, what you want to do is, as you install these packages, just go back and check to make sure that there are no additional updates for that package or for any of the dependencies that may come along with that package. Now, I would encourage you not to run multiple sessions of yum just because you don't want to accidentally corrupt your local installations or your local packages. So again, just embrace the amount of time that this needs. And as I said earlier in the video, once you get this process down for one machine, what I'd like for you to do is to pause the video and then prove to yourself that you sort of understand what's going on by doing this with another virtual machine. And again, you can see just in this short span of time, we're done with this particular package. Now, let's go ahead and install a few more, and we'll try to talk a little bit about each one of these. I'm going to go ahead and install them separately as opposed to all at once. I'm going to go ahead and do make and GCC. Just tools that allow for you to do compiling with the C language on your Linux machine. We'll take a look at that in a later video. I'll actually show you how you can use NetBeans and other tools, even on the command line or the terminal, to compile your C code. In this case, we already have those tools, so there's nothing to add there, nothing to change there. So we want to go ahead and add then support for the kernel headers and kernel development. And again, this allows for us, as the name implies, to do development on kernel level libraries. And again, nothing to do. So far, it seems like we've got all the pieces that we need. And then what we can do now is install support for Perl, DKMS, and bzip2. bzip2 just simply being a packaging tool or a zip tool. And again, what we want to do is, after we get done with this, we want to go ahead and run a yum update. So again, let's let this one take a little bit of time here. May pause the video periodically, record the recording of the video periodically, just in case some of these take a little longer, depending on your our internet connection here. So far, this seems to be moving along pretty quickly. You can get an idea here of what's being downloaded. The RPM, in case you're curious, stands for Red Hat Package Manager. That's actually another package management tool. Essentially, what's happening is Yum is leveraging the Red Hat packages in their repository. And we seem to have downloaded all of them. We're going to go ahead and install them. And so this seems to be going pretty quickly. You can see here where we're now installing Perl, DKMS, and then ultimately we're done. So let's go ahead and one more time. Let's go ahead and do our sudo yum-y update. And again, nothing to do here. That's actually great. We have no dependencies to install. So now let's go ahead and move on to the next step, which in fact does not require us to run sudo, and that is just simply to run our export command. And our export command on the kernel directory, and we're basically going to set it equal to the value at USR source kernels. And then before I run this real quick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over to that folder. I'm actually going to open another window here. So we have uname-r, and let's go ahead and pop over here real quick so we can see what's actually in that folder. So I'm going to cd first to the root, cd usr, and then much like on Windows or a Mac, we can just simply type in a few letters and then hit tab. So source kernels. And then instead of dir, we're going to do ls-l. And you can see here that I have a file here corresponding to each one of the versions of the kernel that I have installed on this machine. And so when we run this, and specifically if we look at this uname-r, so in other words, if we come over here for just a second and we put in uname-r, what this does is it will export the name of this particular kernel and allow for another boot option. Now, why would you do this? Well, basically what happens is when you update the kernel, you update the set of libraries for the operating system to boot from. And in some cases, some of your software might not work with a newer version of the kernel. And so you want the ability to be able to roll back, if you would, to a previous version of the kernel. Now, if you've been really quick when you looked at the booting process, you probably saw this flash by. The idea is that you can actually choose which version of the kernel that you wish to boot to. We're not going to worry about that in this video, but what we are going to do is go ahead and run this command real quick. And if you go back here to this particular example, we see that we have 5.14.0-295. And if we run our ls-l, you'll notice that you already had that version. Now, why was that? Well, it turns out that we did a system update. If you've not done that system update, or maybe you're working with a newer version of the kernel, you would get another entry there. Now, at this point, then we're ready to go ahead and reboot our computer. We can do it through the UI, or we can simply do it through the console. In this case, I'm going to do it through the console. And if we wait just a second, we're going to power down our machine. It'll come back up. And in just a second, we can log back on. Now, we've got a couple of ways that we can go about installing the VirtualBox guest editions. For a little bit of variety, I know that we've been doing some of this with the command line. I would actually like for us to do this particular example with the graphical user interface. In other words, we could see some of the similarities behind, or rather between, a Windows operating system and a Mac operating system, and in this case, our distribution of Linux. And what we're going to do now is, once we are logged on, and again, hopefully for the last time, I'm going to go ahead and make this just a little larger by changing the display settings. Apply. Keep changes. You'll notice that once again, I'm still stuck. My mouse is still stuck within my window without hitting the control key. I can't get out. But what we'd like to do now is we'd like to insert the VirtualBox Guest Editions CD. And now this is going to sound a little strange until you think about how older computers work. In other words, think of ones that might have a USB CD DVD drive, or even one that's actually in the desktop itself, in the chassis itself. And the idea is that you have the drive, but you don't have a disk in it. And so what you do to add that disk is you simply come up here to Devices, and you insert the Guest Editions CD image. And much like the image for the operating system, the CentOS ISO, there's an ISO that essentially gets launched or booted and then launch the auto run. And so in this case, you'll get presented with the graphical user interface to go ahead and select run. Again, we can do this from the command line, but why not take advantage of this feature in the operating system? And again, what it's going to do is it's going to simply launch an install script. This will take a few seconds, in which time then basically what we want to do is talk a little bit about what happens if you've accidentally skipped over this and hit cancel. Well, it turns out that you can just simply come up here to the devices under the optical drives, and you can actually just remove the disk from the virtual drive. Please don't do that at this point. And then simply add it one more time. And this point, then basically a series of scripts are going to run that install features for the VirtualBox Guest Editions. Now, you may or may not get a warning or an error. In this case, we do. I know as of this point there is a dependency missing, but it does not seem to impact us initially. We're looking for support for the monitor, in other words, for the screen size, being able to resize easily, and also for things like copy and paste. If I figure out what the dependency is that's missing, I will go back and either update the comments or possibly even create another video. At this point, though, we should now be able to move our mouse seamlessly from our virtual machine out to our host. And so you can see here that it's resized. Somehow we launched the installer twice, but if you'll notice now, for the very last time, we can adjust the screen size, hit apply, keep changes, or what we can do is we can actually just simply resize now the window. And there may be a little bit of lag depending on how much RAM you have allocated to your machine and also what your video card is like. But at this point, we are set. And the last thing that we want to do real quick before we leave this particular video is we can go ahead and come up here to the shared clipboard, enable bidirectionality. For the drag and drop, I encourage you to go ahead and enable bidirection as well. And at this point, you can actually copy and paste from and to your virtual machine. So as I mentioned before, we're not going to do both of these virtual machines in this video. Encourage you to maybe go back in the video, pause it, try to do this again with your other virtual machines. Just get familiar with the process. And then, of course, periodically, you simply want to run the yum-y install for packages, but also the yum-y update to update existing packages. So hopefully you found this video useful. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And thank you for watching.